They say there was a time, long ago, when humans roamed freely across the stars. Legends, tales told in darkened corridors and back-alley cantinas, speak of their battles, their unyielding spirit, their ferocity. But stories can twist over time, grow exaggerated, and I thought I'd long outgrown them. That was, until the day I met him. Now I understand why those stories persist, why species across the galaxy whisper about them with awe and fear. I was scavenging on the edge of a desolate world, a planet so forgotten it barely had a name. It was lifeless and bleak, scarred by ancient battles. The ruins lay scattered like the bones of some great beast, memories of a war I couldn't even begin to imagine. Dust clung to everything, muffling sound, muting even the colors. And yet, in that desolation, there was him. A lone figure, standing still as a statue amidst the rubble. For a moment, I thought he was some relic, a metal statue placed there as a silent guardian. But then he moved. It was subtle, just a shift of weight, the barest movement of his head, but it made my blood turn to ice. There in the starkness, I had stumbled upon a creature I had only heard about in whispers. A human. The last of his kind, perhaps. Or at least the last one foolish enough to venture so far from the comforts of civilization. He was unlike any life form I'd encountered. His clothes, worn and faded, clung to his powerful frame, evidence of countless battles and hardships endured. A strange mask covered part of his face, and his gaze, piercing and cold, locked onto mine with an intensity that felt almost predatory. I had always thought humans were simple, primitive even, but in that instant, standing in the weight of his stare, I felt small. Vulnerable. Like prey. My instincts screamed at me to retreat. I had nothing to prove, no reason to linger in the presence of a creature so fabled, so dangerous. But something stopped me, a morbid curiosity, perhaps, or maybe some deep-rooted need to understand if the stories were true. I took a step closer, my breath catching, my senses alert to every movement, every breath. He didn't move, didn't even flinch. It was as if he knew that I posed no threat. Knew that in this forgotten place, in this hollowed-out ruin, he was the predator, and I was just another insignificant life form, curious but harmless. There was a confidence in his stillness, a quiet assurance that unnerved me more than any weapon could. I tried to speak, words stumbling from my mouth in a language he might understand. He watched, silent, his gaze unbroken, unreadable. I wondered then if he could even understand me, or if, perhaps, he was sizing me up, waiting, judging. I could feel my heart pounding, every instinct telling me to flee, yet my feet stayed rooted. I was caught between terror and awe, held in place by the power of his presence. What was he doing here, on this dead world? Was he a ghost, a remnant of humanity's once vast reach, or something more dangerous, a survivor? His eyes, steady and unblinking, seemed to hint at a hidden knowledge, a purpose beyond my comprehension. And in those moments, I realized that this wasn't a creature bound by the rules I knew. Humans were different. The way he stood there, unmoved by the harsh winds and barren landscape, as though it were his rightful domain, it was unsettling. I felt foolish for staying, for not fleeing when I had the chance. I tried to rationalize it. He was alone, unarmed, and I had the advantage. But as I watched him, my confidence drained, replaced by a quiet dread. I had seen warriors, soldiers, beings bred for combat. But none had ever stood like that, with such an air of certainty, as if he had long ago accepted whatever fate awaited him and emerged unbroken. Some part of me wondered if he was dangerous, or merely misunderstood. The stories I had heard, stories of human resilience, of their relentless survival against impossible odds, flooded my mind. I could feel my fear and curiosity warring within me. What was he? Was he an echo of some ancient force, a creature tempered by countless battles, or simply a man? One who had endured more than I could ever fathom. I wanted to ask him, to break the silence that stretched between us like a chasm. But the words died on my tongue. Somehow, I knew he would not answer. Perhaps he found my fear amusing, or perhaps he simply didn't care. To him, I was nothing more than a passing shadow, a fleeting distraction. And yet, as I stood there, trapped in his gaze, I felt as though I was looking into the eyes of something eternal, something that had seen worlds rise and fall, and remain unchanged. I fought the urge to flee, to break free from the weight of his stare. And in that moment, I understood why so many feared his kind, why the stories lived on. It wasn't just their strength, their intelligence, or even their resilience. It was something deeper, a silent, unshakable confidence, a presence that defied logic, that dared you to come closer and yet warned you to stay away. I took a step back, my hands trembling, my mind racing. The legends were true. The stories of humanity's unyielding spirit, their capacity to endure and survive, they weren't exaggerations. They were warnings, echoes of a time when beings like him had walked among us, shaping and reshaping the stars. And now, here he was, a relic of that age, a testament to a species that refused to be forgotten. As I backed away, he didn't follow, didn't even blink. I don't know if he felt pity, or if I was simply beneath his notice. All I know is that he let me go, allowed me to retreat, carrying with me the memory of his gaze, a gaze that would haunt me, remind me of the power hidden within those ancient stories. My curiosity grew despite the fear gnawing at me. I had to understand what I was seeing, what he was. The stories claimed that humans were more than they appeared, that they possessed abilities far beyond what their primitive forms suggested. I didn't believe in myths. I trusted facts, logic, and tangible proofs. And yet, here was a human, so calm, so steadfast, that I couldn't help but test the edges of what he might be capable of. I decided to approach slowly, to see if he'd respond to my gestures. I extended a simple greeting, one that my species used to communicate with unknown beings, hoping he might show some hint of understanding, some sign of intelligence. But he only watched, his expression unchanging. It was like trying to communicate with an immovable force, something that saw through me rather than at me. If he understood, he gave no indication that my words mattered to him. Still, I couldn't stop there. I tried a different method, a few symbols, universal ones that most intelligent life forms would recognize. Nothing. No reaction, not even a flicker of recognition. Yet he stood, poised and unwavering, as if daring me to keep going. I couldn't tell if he was ignoring me or if he simply didn't care. So I decided to observe him more closely, putting his resilience to the test. I created a small storm in his vicinity, using my technology to whip up dust and wind. I expected him to shield himself, to falter or retreat. But he simply stood there, weathering it, unaffected, with his eyes still fixed on the distance, as though the storm was nothing more than a slight inconvenience. His skin, though seemingly fragile, showed no reaction to the abrasive gusts. I'd seen soldiers buckle under such conditions, yet he remained undisturbed. Intrigued, I tried another tactic. I increased the pressure in the air, just enough to make breathing difficult, hoping it would force him to show some sign of weakness. Yet again, he adapted. His breath slowed, his stance steady, as though he had long ago mastered the art of surviving with limited air. I watched him with a growing sense of disbelief. Where I expected weakness, he showed only quiet strength. It was as if he had become part of the environment, unyielding, unbreakable. I intensified my tests, subtly increasing the intensity each time. I altered the temperature, fluctuating between freezing cold and searing heat, conditions that would have driven any other being to panic or flee. But he endured them all, merely adjusting, never complaining, never so much as flinching. With every test, he seemed to grow stronger, as if the extremes I subjected him to were nothing more than trivial annoyances. I had encountered beings with natural resilience, yes, but this was different. This was willpower. Inwardly, I questioned everything I'd thought I knew about humans. Surely, this couldn't be real. Was he hiding something, some piece of advanced technology, some secret adaptation his species had developed over millennia of conflict? Or was this simply what humans were? Perhaps the stories weren't just exaggerations, after all. Perhaps they were warnings. He had to be hiding some secret ability, some hidden power that allowed him to defy every expectation, every limit. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a depth to him, something unreachable that I would never fully comprehend. He remained silent, offering no explanations, no insights. He seemed almost bored by my attempts, as if he had faced far greater challenges in his time and found mine laughably small. It made me question my own understanding, my assumptions about strength and endurance. For all my advanced knowledge, for all the power my kind wielded, I suddenly felt inadequate. If this was just one human, alone, unarmed, standing resolute on a barren world, what must they be like in groups? As I observed him, a strange fear crept into my mind. What if he wasn't even trying? What if he had powers he hadn't yet shown, abilities far beyond my comprehension? I could feel my curiosity turning into a kind of awe, a hesitant respect mixed with fear. He hadn't spoken a single word, hadn't made a single move to harm me, and yet I felt a warning in his presence, a silent threat. It wasn't that he was aggressive or dangerous in the traditional sense. It was that he was unfathomable, his strength hidden beneath layers I couldn't hope to penetrate. In that silence, I began to feel foolish for testing him, as though I were a child playing with fire, unaware of its potential to burn. And he stood there, unmoved, as though watching me with some unspoken understanding, a knowledge I couldn't reach. It was as if he knew that, eventually, I would understand his strength, not through any display of power but through his mere endurance, his silent defiance. Finally, I withdrew, feeling an unfamiliar unease that I couldn't shake. I hadn't seen anything spectacular, nothing flashy or violent, yet I was left questioning the limits of humanity, the potential they held. He hadn't broken or faltered. He had simply stood, absorbing everything I threw at him, his silence more intimidating than any weapon. As I turned away, I glanced back one last time, feeling that, somehow, I had glimpsed a truth that was better left untouched. I began to sense something unusual beneath the surface of this human, something beyond strength or resilience. I had tried to push him, to gauge his limits, but instead, he did something I hadn't expected. I had thrown obstacles in his path, crafted hardships, thinking he might falter or reveal some hidden weakness. But instead of defiance or anger, he showed empathy. He looked at me not as an enemy, not even as an adversary, but almost as if he understood my intentions and felt pity for me. I struggled to comprehend it. Here was a creature who had endured conditions that should have broken him, yet he seemed more concerned for my motives than his own suffering. When I came close to him, he didn't recoil or retaliate. There was a calm in his expression that I couldn't place, a softness that seemed absurdly out of place. For a being capable of immense strength, his gentleness made no sense. Why would he not see me as an enemy? Why did he remain so patient? I felt a stirring of shame, as if I were the one who had misjudged him, who lacked some essential quality he possessed. And despite everything, I could feel that he didn't harbor malice, even after all I'd done to him. It was baffling, almost humbling. I hadn't expected a human to possess something so close to mercy. Then, in subtle ways, I saw an unbreakable spirit in him, one that defied every natural law I knew. I watched him face trials that should have worn him down, but he only seemed to grow stronger, his resolve sharpening like tempered steel. It was as if his will was forged from something beyond mere survival. There was an intensity in him, an inner fire that seemed impossible to extinguish. Even in silence, his stance, his eyes, all told me that surrender was an alien concept to him. I found myself both in awe and unsettled. I began to wonder what force could possibly bend, let alone break, something so determined. Stories I'd once dismissed as exaggerations began to resurface. Legends from eons past, tales that had spread across worlds of humans who had survived the impossible, who had stood alone against forces that would crush any other species. It was said that they were masters of endurance, capable of feats no other being could dream of. They'd thrived in toxic environments, rebuilt in the aftermath of devastation, and emerged victorious from wars where they'd been the underdog. I'd heard whispers of their triumphs, of battles won against all odds, of strategies that defied logic and enemies who had vastly underestimated them. And here, in the single human, I saw proof that those tales might have been truer than I ever cared to admit. One story in particular came to mind: how humans had survived a great cataclysm on their home planet, a disaster that should have wiped them out entirely. But instead, they adapted, rebuilt, and thrived, using the very ruins of their civilization as stepping stones to a new future. I had thought such tales were embellishments, romanticized myths. But now, standing before this human, I wondered if they were far less myth and much more warning. With each moment I spent observing him, I found my perspective shifting. I had approached him with fear, testing him with the assumption that he was a threat. But now, I felt something more complex. Yes, there was still a caution, a knowledge that his kind held a power I could barely comprehend, but it was tempered with something deeper, a reluctant respect. I began to understand why other species spoke of humans in such hushed tones, why they were viewed as both fearsome and admirable. They were unpredictable, yes, but also endlessly fascinating. They were creatures who could stand alone, against all odds, and yet still offer a hand of compassion to those who sought to harm them. This single human embodied the contradictions I'd heard of. His silence, his patience, his resilience, none of it matched the fearsome image I had expected. Instead, he was something more, something that defied categorization. And in that defiance, I saw the true source of their power. It wasn't in their physical form or even in their intelligence, but in their spirit, in that unique, unyielding fire that no force could quell. I found myself wondering what kind of galaxy we would live in if more humans roamed it. Would they bring peace, or would they unsettle the delicate balance we had all grown used to? I couldn't say. All I knew was that they would be a force unlike any other. They would bring a strength that could bend, but not break. A compassion that could see past even hostility. In his silence, he had shown me more about his kind than any words could have. Humans were indeed the legends that had been whispered about, the ones who faced the impossible and came through, scarred but unbowed. I began to understand why it was said that once you meet a human, you are never quite the same again. They were beings who redefined survival, who possessed a spirit that could turn even enemies into reluctant admirers. As I left, I felt a strange mix of relief and awe. I had come face to face with a creature whose strength lay not in aggression, but in resilience, whose presence demanded respect even in the absence of words. Just as I felt I had come to understand the human, to grasp the strange mix of empathy, strength, and resilience he possessed, everything changed. A threat emerged, sudden and brutal, from the shadows of that barren world. At first, I didn't see it, only felt the tremors beneath the ground, heard the echo of something monstrous stirring below. My instincts urged me to flee. Survival was my first and strongest impulse. But before I could move, I saw the human. He had already turned to face the oncoming danger, his stance ready, steady, as if he had known it was coming all along. I hesitated, watching as a horde of vicious, towering creatures emerged from the depths. Their claws gleamed, their eyes filled with hunger, and their shrieks tore through the air, a sound that sent chills down my spine. I prepared to retreat, thinking this was the end for him, a hopeless encounter that even he couldn't endure. But the human did the unthinkable. He didn't flee or hide, he moved toward them, fearless, determined. For a moment, I questioned his sanity. Did he not realize the magnitude of the threat? Did he not know he was alone against impossible odds? And yet, as he surged forward, I saw something astonishing. His face was set with a grim determination, his eyes alive with a fire I had never seen before. This wasn't reckless courage. It was something deeper, a refusal to surrender, a primal need to stand against the darkness, even if it meant his end. I wanted to call out, to warn him that he was outnumbered, that there was no point in fighting. But even if I had spoken, I knew it wouldn't have mattered. He was already in the fray, meeting the creatures head-on, every movement precise, every attack filled with purpose. He fought like someone who had faced worse and emerged stronger. He didn't hold back, even as the creatures tore at him, slashing through his armor, leaving bloody gashes across his skin. Each wound only seemed to drive him harder, and his strikes grew fiercer, more deliberate. I felt something strange as I watched. I'd expected to see fear in him, perhaps a flash of hesitation. But instead, I saw only resolve, a commitment that went beyond survival, something born out of a strange, unyielding loyalty. For the first time, I wondered if that loyalty extended to me, if he was fighting not only for himself but for the both of us. It didn't make sense, yet there it was, in every blow he struck, every stance he took. He was putting himself at risk, even as the creatures closed in, even as his injuries worsened. At one point, a creature came close to breaking through, and I braced myself for the worst. But he threw himself in its path, taking a brutal hit to protect the only cover we had. I felt a wave of disbelief. He could have dodged, could have retreated and left me to fend for myself. But instead, he chose to endure the blow, using his own body as a shield. The sheer selflessness of it shook me to my core. Here was a creature who, against all odds, had chosen to protect me, an alien who had been testing and challenging him just moments before. It was beyond anything I could understand. I had always viewed strength as something cold, ruthless, a trait that helped one survive alone. But this human strength was different. It was bound up in sacrifice, in a determination to defend even those who hadn't earned his loyalty. He fought on, relentless, his breath ragged but his spirit unbroken. I could see his injuries mounting, his steps growing slower, but he kept pressing forward, driven by some force I couldn't comprehend. The creatures, sensing his resolve, hesitated, as if they too could feel the weight of his unbreakable will. And still, he refused to falter, pushing back even when it seemed impossible, defying every expectation, every natural law I knew. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last of the creatures fell, defeated by the sheer force of his resolve. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with the aftermath of battle. The human stood there, his breath coming in harsh gasps, his body battered but his eyes still bright with that undying fire. I could hardly believe what I'd witnessed. This wasn't mere survival. It was triumph born of defiance, a victory claimed through grit and sacrifice. I approached him, uncertain, awed, my previous arrogance stripped away. He had endured more than any being I had ever known, facing odds that would have broken even the strongest of us. And yet he had emerged, scarred but victorious, standing tall with a strength I would never forget. In that moment, I understood why his kind had become the legends they were. It wasn't simply their physical endurance or intelligence. It was their spirit, their capacity to face the impossible with unshakable resolve and the strange, selfless loyalty they showed even to those who didn't deserve it. He could have left me, could have prioritized his own survival, yet he hadn't. And in doing so, he'd shown me the true strength of humanity, a force that went beyond muscle and bone, rooted in heart and will. I knew then that I was forever changed. I had seen the power of a human spirit, the defiance that made them so feared and respected across the stars. And I left that place with a newfound respect, a reverence for a species I had once dismissed as primitive. He had shown me that humans were not just survivors. They were something far more remarkable, far more enduring than I could have ever imagined. As I departed from that barren world, the image of the human lingered with me, haunting and humbling in ways I could scarcely understand. He was no longer a creature of myth or legend, no longer a curiosity to be prodded and tested. I had faced him, seen him tested by forces meant to break even the strongest, and he had emerged, scarred but unyielding, a being whose spirit defied all logic. I had believed that my species understood strength, that we knew the bounds of resilience, yet what I saw in him forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew. There was a power in him that transcended the physical. It was deeper, rooted in something I could only describe as a relentless will, a refusal to be diminished by any force, no matter how overwhelming. And it was not only his strength that stood out, but the strange, almost paradoxical empathy that ran alongside it. He could face unimaginable peril without faltering, yet he was capable of kindness, even mercy, toward one who had challenged and doubted him. It was a blend of qualities that made no sense to me, a contradiction that felt at once beautiful and terrifying. In him, I saw the depths of his kind, a species that, though often vulnerable and small compared to the grand forces of the galaxy, seemed able to survive and even thrive through sheer force of spirit. I came to realize why his kind were spoken of in such odd whispers, why other species either steered clear or, like myself, came with a reckless curiosity that could only end in revelation. The fear that humans inspired was not merely because of their strength or endurance. It was because they were willing to fight for more than survival. They would press forward with unwavering loyalty, defy all odds, and make sacrifices without a second thought. Such beings, I realized, were capable of upending entire civilizations, not through brute force, but by inspiring those around them, leaving a lasting impact that rippled out like waves across the galaxy. I knew, too, that this encounter would remain with me, etched in my memory like a scar. Even now, as I returned to the safety of my own world, the image of him haunted me, the human who had fought with unwavering resolve, who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, not for glory, but simply because he chose to. It was a choice that I could not comprehend, a choice that made him both fearsome and inspiring, a creature to admire yet tread carefully around. I knew then why humans were respected and feared in equal measure. I understood the legends of worlds left forever changed by even a single human presence, of allies who found new strength in their company and enemies who learned too late of their mistake. There was something indefinable within them, something that no other species could emulate, a spark that was uniquely their own, a spark that could neither be extinguished nor fully understood. It was a quality that inspired others to push their own limits, but it was also a quality that terrified those who sought control, for it meant that humans could not be predicted, could not be easily subdued or manipulated. And so, I left that place with a warning, a quiet caution that would live within me as long as I did. I would tell others, if they asked, of the humans, of their resilience, their fire, their loyalty. I would describe them as wonders you should only meet once, as beings who could change you in ways you might never have anticipated. They were creatures who, once known, were impossible to forget, who left you with a strange, lingering fear and respect, a mixture that would follow you long after they were gone. If you are fortunate enough never to meet one, count yourself lucky. For once you have, you are forever marked, left with the knowledge that there exists a being whose spirit knows no limit, whose resilience can overcome even the most insurmountable odds. They are a force that cannot be contained, a reminder that there is always something greater than mere survival, something that drives them forward where others would fall. They are both the hope and the terror of this galaxy, a symbol of what can be achieved when strength is bound to compassion, when willpower is unshakable. So, my final words are a warning to any who may one day seek out humans. Know that they are far more than the legends say, and that once you've met one, you will never look upon the galaxy the same way again. You will carry with you a respect laced with fear, a knowledge that there exists a species that stands apart from all others, not because of their technology or intellect, but because of the heart that drives them. Once you meet a human, you'll understand what it means to be truly alive, and you might find, in that understanding, a fear that never quite leaves you.